Hi everyone, today we're going to read chapter 6 of Oliver and the Seawigs. As you can see, we're about halfway through our story now. So chapter 6. As the Thirlstone vanished, all of Cliff's newfound hopelessness drained away. The fight went out of him, and Iris and Oliver felt slump. They couldn't blame him, poor old giant. So much of his golden sand and drifts of flotsam had been washed away, and when he stooped to fetch the water mole. Now it was gone, his stony head was even more bare than before. Now what shall we do? Asked Iris. Go after that Thirlstone, of course, shouted Oliver. Quick, Cliff, follow him. Cliff lifted his cave mouth out of the waves to say, What's the point? He's beaten me. Then he subsided again. You can't just let him win, said Oliver. Is he the sort of island who deserves to win the night of the Seawigs? And as for that Stacey de Lacy, go after them and get the water mole back. How? Rumbled Cliff. They have an army of monkeys. He's got a point, said Iris. Then go to the hallowed shallows, insisted Oliver. Tell everyone what Stacey and his Thirlstone did. They won't listen to me, said Cliff. They'll be too busy admiring the Thirlstone's marvellous sea-wig and laughing at me. So what are you going to do? Asked Iris. Cliff sighed. I'm going to settle, he decided. No, yelled Oliver. I should have done it years ago, Cliff went on. What's the point of all this tramping around collecting stuff? I'm going to stand here and grow roots and forget I ever was a rambler. I'll become just an island. That's what I'm good for. I'm useless, finished, washed up. He sank back slowly into the sea. No, shouted Oliver again. He did a dance of frustration, shin deep in the wavelets which washed Cliff's shores. But no amount of stamping or shouting would make Cliff come up again. Oliver remembered the sad, lifeless, settled isles which Iris had shown him on the way to the sarcastic sea. He imagined the sand and silt slowly piling up around Cliff's feet. Oh dear, said Iris with tears dripping off her chin. I think he means it. Now look what you've done, said Mr. Culpepper, fussily rearranging his nest, which had been terribly knocked by those swarming sea monkeys. If you hadn't dragged us here in search of that stupid wreck, this would never have happened. It's all your fault. Well, I'm not going to let Stacey de Lacy win, said Oliver. Years of exploring had taught him that you don't solve problems by sitting around complaining about them. You have to do something. That's how his mum and dad had saved him from that kimono dragon, and how they escaped from the dungeons of Mumby Mumby. He struck an explorish pose on the shore and said, I'm going to go after that Thirlstone and show it that it can't just go around snitching other people's shipwrecks and kidnapping mums and dads. That's all very well and good, said Iris, but armies of monkeys, remember? Oh, and your boat's gone all flop. Oliver ignored the reminder about the monkeys. He hadn't yet thought of any way that he could deal with them. He had an answer to the part about the boat, though. He opened his explorer pack and triumphantly pulled out a foot pump and a punctured dinghy repair kit. 1 hour of patching and pumping later, he was ready. He shoved the dinghy into the waves and hoisted himself aboard. He tugged the motor starter cord. It didn't work. It never did. You needed big, muscly arms like Dad's to make it start. Iris looked on doubtfully. I suppose I could help, she said. Oh, yes, you'll be a lot of use, snapped Oliver, so sarcastically that even the seaweed was shocked. Your arms are feebler than mine. Oh, I don't mean like that, sniffed the mermaid. She unhooked the motor from the stern of the dinghy and dropped it on the shore. Then, before Oliver asked how that was supposed to help, she scrambled half aboard the dinghy, with her tail hanging off behind. Shove off, she said. Oh, isn't she rude, whispered the weed. I mean shove the dinghy off. Oliver shoved, and the dinghy drifted into the deeper waters. Iris started to flap her tail up and down, driving them away from the shore. It was difficult to steer at first, but they soon worked it out. Iris took the dinghy on a farewell circuit of the island. Oliver looked over the side, down through the waves at the great dim cliff face of Cliff's face looming there. He couldn't see if Cliff's eyes were open or closed. He couldn't tell if the rambling Isle was watching his friends leave or just too sad to care. He waved anyway. Mr. Culpepper flapped over the perch of the dinghy prow. Well, I might as well come with you, he said. After all, you'll need help finding that thieving island, I suppose. So the albatross took off again, soaring towards the horizon, and the mermaid-powered the dinghy followed him, splashing along the lane of open water which the Thirlstone had left through the sarcastic seaweed. I think we'll finish this chapter. There's not too much longer left. It was tiring work for poor Iris. Every few minutes she had to stop and rest while Oliver refuelled her by feeding her caramel bars from his lunchbox. But at last the sarcastic sea was left behind. I wonder why Stacey de Lacy is so keen to help the Thirlstone win the contest anyway, wondered Oliver, but Iris was too busy being an outboard motor to reply. Mr. Culpepper flew above them, calling down directions. At first there was no need, for Oliver and Iris could see the Thirlstone far ahead, but as the day wore on, the thieving island drew away from them, and a strange haze arose. It was hard for even the sharpest eyed albatross to see very far. We are coming near to the hallowed shallows, said Iris. As they began to pass other rambling isles, at first they looked like normal islands, but they were all moving and all in the same direction, with white wakes of foam stretching behind them. Some were as small and tatty as Cliff. Some were magnificent. There was one who had sculptured a sort of volcano on his upper parts and lit a fire in it so trails of smoke mingled it with the haze. There was one who had drizzled wet sand onto a head to build up teetering pinnacles and spires, and others who have arranged miles and miles of weed into massive beehive with a small ship stuck in the middle. None of them paid the slightest attention to the dinghy. If only Cliff was here, said Oliver, feeling sad, as they left their own rambling isle behind. The rest would only laugh at him, said Iris. Some of those Seawigs are to die for. There's a lovely illustration there. Meanwhile, back in the sarcastic sea, Cliff was thinking sadly of his friends. He had never had actual people living on him before, and he missed them now they were gone. Not only that, the seaweed had drifted closer now, and he was not moving, and it kept jeering and sniggering at him and saying how brave it thought he was. No, he told himself, it's no use worrying. I've had enough. All these years wandering and gathering things, just so some other isles can pinch them. That's it, I'm settling here. Maybe one day someone will put on another danger, submerge rock sign on me. And he shut his eyes and sank his toes down deep into the sea floor and tried to stand as still and lifeless as any other rock of the ocean. But he could not stop his mind from working. He could not stop himself from thinking. He thought about how wrong it was the Thirlstone was allowed to roam around wrecking other people's wigs. Then he thought sadly about that water mole. Then he thought sadly that the water mole was the best thing he had ever found. Then he thought that, actually, Oliver and Iris were the best things he'd ever found. He began to worry about them, began to think that maybe the jeering weed was right to hint that he'd been cowardly. Maybe Oliver had been right. Maybe he should go to the hallowed shallows and tell the other isles that rotten-hearted Thirlstone was up to. Somebody's got to do something, he said aloud, and Oliver and Iris are too small, and Mr. Culpepper is just an albatross, so that somebody must be me. Ooh, said the seaweed, tittering in that annoying way it had. But it soon stopped, for Cliff was on the move again, striding and swimming as quickly as he could towards the same horizon that Oliver's dinghy had vanished in. And that takes us up to chapter 7, which we will begin reading tomorrow. I'll see you then.